You're listening to Data Center Therapy. Please take a number and an engineer will be right with you. Welcome back, everybody, to Data Center Therapy, a podcast from IVOXY Consulting that talks all things IT with a healthy dose of empathy. It has been a long time coming, but I'm happy to report I am still Matt Yette, and I'm here with my Vanna to my Pat, Mr. Matt Cozzolino.
Here you go. Here I am.
There we go. I'll take a C as in Cozzolino.
You'll take a C as in Cozzolino.
I gotta buy a C.
Bing.
Yes. Yeah, we are back. We have had a lot going on, right? Our calendars are jammed. I mean, we don't say that as a complaint, but ultimately it means things like the pod kind of sometimes get the boot down the road, kick the can, so to speak. But it is something that we are both very excited to be back. Matt, you're fighting off a little bit of something, so
I am. It's been a little bit. So if I out of the way a second, that's
this is where work from home works, because I can talk to you, but not, put myself at risk of your germs.
Right. It's gross.
Yeah. Well, okay. So let's just jump right back into it, right? Let's not stand on ceremony here. A lot's been going on, but one of the things that we've been seeing an awful lot of customers asking questions on, and Matt's been really busy doing curriculum development and Ask Me Anythings and all this vSphere 8. vSphere 8, it's almost it's not quite yearly. It's like bi-yearly. They do a major version, 2 or 3 every 2.5 years.
Yeah. As I was looking at it, 7 has been out for, I think, 2 years now. What was it? 7 came out in 2020.
2020. Yeah.
March 2020.
And
actually,
I feel like they've sat on this update 3, and now we're going to have to expand a new alphabet. They're putting out so many like sub updates that like I'm 3T
3L or something. Yeah.
It's longer than that. Yeah. It's crazy. So a lot of the stuff that I think this conversation comes up a lot because you have customers, a lot of them that are still on like 6.5, right? Or 6.7, where, okay, oops, as of October, which is already 5 months ago, we're out of support.
October 15th, 2022.
And I think a lot of customers too, not that it's okay, but it's also, you're not living in this catastrophic things are going to stop working. Then again, it is they're spoiled. I think people are spoiled by the robust nature of the ESXi hypervisor, right? It's pretty well worn. Purple screens of death they don't just randomly pop up.
They don't happen, no.
If they're going to happen, they're going to happen right after you've upgraded or something changed, right? It's not just going to, all of a sudden. So I think there's a little less urgency, but now, okay, fine. We have to get on a version that is supported. Let's roll. Now do I go to 7 or go to 8?
It's a good question.
Also, we're not in that life cycle where I think what was it? 6.0 deprecated an awful lot of Intel CPUs, right? One of those not recent, but
I think I feel like I recall that happening with 7 mostly. Right?
Yes.
7's when I started seeing the errors that, hey, the CPU is not going to be supported anymore, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and knocked a lot of people's home labs out, where it's like, okay, I'm at the end of the road, I can't come up on that. But it also, forced a lot of, forced obsolescence of the hardware you might be completely happy with. So with all of that, 8, I don't believe really does any of that.
There's one thing that it does, and that is the TPM module.
Okay.
It starts throwing an error about the TPM module if you don't have a TPM 2.0. So
okay, let's get into that.
There you go.
First, I want to say we're going to talk about it in depth a little bit more later, but I alluded to the events that Mr. Cozzolino has been doing. He had an Ask Me Anything. We've really been ramping up with the webinars too. So, if you're not on an email list for us, we try our very best not to be spammy, right? So if you want to be alerted to our events, reach out to your account manager if you're an IVOXY customer. And if not, email us, podcast@ivoxy.com. And, you'll be notified when we have these kind of events, and they're all, those kind of things are free. In addition to that, Matt is putting on, and I know we're only a couple of weeks away from it, but Matt is doing an intro to vSphere 8 class. 3 days, right, Matt? 3 or 4 days?
It's 3 days, and then there's a half day office hours at the end of it.
That's awesome. That's really cool. It's built with our lab, right? So it's everybody has an environment. There's
madly working on
that.
Working on the labs right now. So
there you go. So this is March 21st to the 24th. So if you want in, slots are limited, space is limited, but there is still availability. So reach out to your account manager if you want to get in on the intro to vSphere 8 class. And then come mid-April, the 18th to the 21st of April, Matt's doing the vSphere 8 advanced class.
Yes.
You know what? Heck, Matt, let's say while we're talking about it now.
Okay.
intro, advanced. I'm okay. I work for Acme Incorporated, and I'm in charge of my virtual environment. What would be the best for me? What is my skill set? What lines up? What would be the most interesting? And why would I maybe not want to do the advanced or only stick an intro or whatever?
Okay. So let's give an example for that. So if you're running this environment, if this is your environment that you're running and managing, you need to know how to configure iSCSI on VMware so that iSCSI can connect to your storage, or NFS. How you configure it is intro. The advanced class, we're going to focus more on why are we doing this. So when we're talking about iSCSI, we're going to dedicate these 2 interfaces for iSCSI. Advanced is going to say, well, let's talk about maybe 2 interfaces for iSCSI, 2 interfaces for network or for VM network stuff. What are the architectural decisions that we're looking at in designing this? What are our broader environment going to look like? Do we need 2 data centers? How are we doing VR?
Like that advanced tier also gives me I can also self-troubleshoot because I truly understand why I'm doing things. And therefore, if I run into performance issues, you're only using one path on your iSCSI. You're not doing multiple VM kernel ports, things like that. Okay.
We're focusing more on a how to do the thing in the intro class, and more on the why are we doing the thing in the advanced class.
So if you have
some questions, making some critical thinking about that.
If you're out there listening and you haven't had the pleasure of a Mr. Cozzolino talk course, I got to say, Matt and I have been friends since I've started at IVOXY 10 years ago. And he likes to teach. Matt and I'll have conversations, and it's a shame that he doesn't bring around a whiteboard with him, right? Because I feel like he's the kind of guy to have laptop on one shoulder, whiteboard under the other arm kind of thing, because he loves to just chart out. Let me show you why this is. We've talked about amateur radio, talking about low voltage lighting, all of this kind of stuff. And it's like, let me show you what I've done here, Matt, is how and he just, so it lends itself to a really engaging training class, right? And again, historically at IVOXY, all of our trainings have been original content. They are not training to a test. They are not teaching you how to pass XYZ. It is practical, hands-on, work on your own environment knowledge that you're going to take back and say, I can do my job better tomorrow, boss. And and Matt, nobody's better than Matt at equipping you to do that.
Well, thank you. Thank you,
I
Matt.
mean that. Yeah, absolutely. And not a lie, Mr. Coz. Well, that's cool. So yeah, reach out to your account manager. Again, it's coming up a couple weeks now, March 21st. You want to get on the intro class, and you've got about a month and a half if you want to jump in. Again, those things fill up quickly. So first come, first serve. Yeah. So vSphere 8.
vSphere 8.
I've had customers ask me about 7. What's new? And I'll be honest, let me frame it. The new exciting, I'm doing backflips. This is amazing. vMotion. I always go back to that technology, right? Life-changing things in the vSphere universe tend to be few and far between the more mature this product gets. So
vSphere's been around a bit.
Why do I care, Matt?
vSphere's been around a bit. So we've got some mostly enhancements to stability and optimizations of the environment, of the vSphere environment as a whole, right? That's kind of the big ones right now. Is the question, what's kind of the biggest one? What do I think is the most important or the coolest bit? Again, it's one of those ones that not everyone is going to use or see or have use for immediately, but there's this concept of a distributed processing unit, a DPU. And what the DPU is it's on a network adapter right now, and it's a system on a chip, or a system on a board, I guess you could say. So your network adapter has not just the network interfaces, but it also has its own discrete compute and memory space to run its own version of ESXi on.
And I'm guessing it happens to be married to a network adapter now, because if you're going to have connectivity, you're going to require a network adapter. And those exist: core, distribution layer, access layer, edge layer.
I could see that, expanding and maybe coming in some sort of a different card, a different type of offload card or something. But right now, yes, that exists in the network cards. And it's
what's the
Intel
card going in?
It's a Intel, not an Intel. It's an AMD. Oh, what's the AMD? The AMD Pensando, and then the NVIDIA Bluefield are the 2 cards that we can get right now for the data processing unit.
So I buy a card. What do I need? Do I a PCIe slot on a PC or what?
Yep. It's a PCIe. It's a PCIe network adapter. You slide that into your network adapter, and really what it is it shows up as a network adapter component, right? It shows up as a network connectivity for the environment. But then when you're doing things like deploying NSX and you're doing distributed firewalling on your ESX hosts, right? Today, without this offload card, without something like this, when you're doing all of those firewall rules, when you're looking through those and scanning those and matching and performing that firewalling action on that traffic, it's happening in the CPU on the server.
Sure.
Which is taking away from those CPU cycles that your VMs are trying to consume, right? So having the DPU gives us a place to run that that distributed firewall context.
So you're getting me here. Is this an offload card, or is this ESX at the edge out there in a non-traditional form factor? Because the leading points, and this should just be what I've read, is not exactly what I'm hearing from you. It's more like, hey, you can run a hypervisor anywhere on a network card.
So that's a yes, you could.
I'm focusing on the wrong thing, is what you're telling me.
Yeah. So
good. Yeah.
Fundamentally, yes, it's ESXi installed on this card that's in this server.
Okay.
Because that's what happens is when you install this, when you see this card, when you attach it, initiate it, make it exist in your environment, a version of ESXi gets installed onto that card. So you run two hypervisors on that one server.
Okay, so it's not a traditional, I add it as a host under vCenter in a cluster.
Exactly.
Ooh.
Exactly. So kind of, but not really, right? Because it is running the hypervisor, but it isn't like you see it as its own thing.
Oh, okay. I thought it was like, hey, you can just add this thing as another host in a cluster.
No, think about what the VLCS, those little VMs that get spun up inside of your cluster.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So those exist as VMs, and they're a place for VMware to run clustered services for the entire cluster as a VM that's stateless, right? We don't care about those clusters. We don't care about those VMs. They get deleted and recreated. So why run those on those CPUs that we pay a ton of money for? Why not run those offloaded onto a card like this?
Do you see, and right now it seems like networking is the offloaded service, but I'm now reading this at vSphere Distributed Services Engine, right? The concept that they're trying to do with the vSphere cluster, little VCLS VMs, I wouldn't be surprised to see vCenter and all of those functions start to trickle down into these sub
potentially. Yeah, potentially. I don't know that I'd go so far as to say
well, it makes me nervous.
vCenter, right? I don't know that I go so far as to say vCenter is the thing that get offloaded to this, but more the processing HA, processing DRS,
right?
All of those little worker things that have to happen. Let's put those down here because those are stateless and we don't really care if they exist or don't.
Okay,
right?
so where's the line? So any customer using NSX, they'll probably see a benefit. And I guess the more, I would assume, a single 10 gig link went 40 gig links, 100 gig. I'm assuming the higher that goes, the more increased burden on the CPU would be. So
yeah. So So right now the heavy hitter is doing the network introspection. So right now we do a span and a tap off of the box, off of the ESX host over to my monitoring device. Now we can have that monitoring and metric collection exist on each hypervisor. So it's local.
That's big right there.
Yep.
And not only that, but for network traffic.
Exactly.
Right? You're not,
you can see all of your micro segmentation. Yeah. So all of that stuff, if you've got a lot of the offload stuff that NSX is doing can be pushed down onto this card. And then it is a different piece of hardware. So there is a complete discrete separation between where I'm running my distributed firewall and the workload environment. So the VMs exist up here in the hypervisor and my firewalling exists down here on this card. And there is a physical separation between those 2 points, right? So that's the big one. If you're doing a lot of that introspection, that networking stuff right now, today, that's where this is going to come in.
And it looks like when you create a distributed switch at that moment, when you're assigning uplinks, you also say, hey, if you want to offload any of this stuff, do you have a card in there? And it shows up and pop goes the weasel. Bob's your uncle.
Bob's your uncle. Yep.
Very cool. No,
Yeah.
you turned me around on that, Coz. I learned something already, and I didn't have to pay for a seat in your class.
There you go.
So thank you. All right, what else we got in vSphere 8?
So the DPU is kind of the big one. The other pieces kind of all, I see them being tied together. So there's a AI and machine learning component and hardware groups. So there's simplified hardware consumption, and all of these things kind of tie together. The hardware consumption is, if you've got, so specifically with machine learning is a lot of iterative little steps, multiple iterative little steps of the same thing, which lends itself, as far as a workload goes, to running on a GPU, right?
Okay. Because
a GPU processes polygons 1,000 bazillion times a second, right? So we throw a ton of GPUs in there, and maybe we've got 2 GPUs which have a interconnect between the 2 physical cards across the
top. Like an SLI kind of thing? Sure.
Or we have a cluster that's got a GPU that ties directly to a physical network adapter to bypass CPU and get data out onto the network so it can talk to the cluster really quick, right? So because we're providing this hardware and we're making these hardware components inside of the hypervisor bigger and bigger, we need to be able to present that as a device group to the ESX cluster, so that when I have a VM that's consuming the resources of 2 GPUs, now DRS can see that device group and know where to place this VM as it vMotions around through the cluster. So it's visibility of that hardware inside of the hypervisor itself. And we can either group the devices by GPU, so these 2 physical devices are connected, or these 2 devices share a PCI bus, so a network adapter and a GPU card. So,
and another thing I like to, I'm hearing you talk about this, and it sounds like when you explain what's new in vSphere 8, it almost, not that you won't talk about it in intro, but it almost sounds like the reasoning behind it, they're all kind of advanced topics, right? There's no there's no like huge headline features. This is a brand new capability. It's more like taking what we've done and maturing it and making it more robust and under the covers. I was just looking at another feature that you can actually choose to maximize performance for latent sensitive workloads by making sure that all compute and memory is reserved and local to the threads on the CPU as well. So you're not stretching across multiple CPUs either, which is pretty neat.
Which you bring up is the NUMA cell, right? So we've talked about NUMA since 6. We've talked about NUMA since forever, right? Yeah. So now we actually get the visibility of that NUMA placement as in the VM itself.
That's pretty cool.
So yeah, similar, better consumption of the physical hardware and identifying, what are these VMs? What's important about these VMs? How do I tune my environment? In
a smaller, modestly sized environment, I mean, VMware has done such a good job of just set and forget. And the early days, remember resource groups? And I think a lot of customers saw it. This is a feature, I have to turn it on. And they would end up having worse performance because, quite frankly, they're just getting too cute. Where it's like VMware was, hey, look at this neat thing. I'm going to turn it on. Ultimately,
you don't necessarily know what it does. Yeah.
Right. And so it's cool because if you run a handful of VMs, few dozen, chances are you have the hardware resource behind it. You don't have any outsized VMs. Throw them all on there. Let DRS do its thing, and you're not going to really feel anything. But I do like the ability to pull back the covers and say, look, I need this on this workload. I've got a DBA who's living up to his acronym and needs all of it.
Here's my voicemail server. Here's my voice system that actually is latency sensitive. And when we're on calls, I hear as it whatever's right. That's where that gets fixed.
Right. Like take the blame off your virtual environment and where it belongs, back on the network. It's the network.
Exactly. Always the network.
Coz, tell me about Tanzu a little bit, if you wouldn't mind. I mean, they've put their toe into containers before version 8, right? So what's different this time?
So VMware is not driving the boat with containers. So VMware has to be a player in an ecosystem that they don't necessarily own. So the big thing about Tanzu right now and Kubernetes on vSphere is that it's going to try to be just like every other
Well, I think they would have liked
environment.
to, right? But they realized that they wouldn't have gotten traction if they decided to start up their own stack.
Right. So their things right now is that the container environment, when you use Tanzu to deploy your Kubernetes cluster, the Kubernetes cluster is going to exist and behave just like a standard Kubernetes cluster. Your API calls are going to be the same. The behavior is going to be the same. Everything's going to exist the same there. And then on top of that, VMware is leaning really hard into the concept of service provider might be not the appropriate term, but this concept of we're running this vSphere environment, we're operating it, managing all this hardware so that we can provide resources to these applications that run. These might be VMs, these might be Kubernetes. So this concept of we're a provider, when we're talking about Kubernetes, and I can deploy a cluster and I can bring these resources I can template these resources into this cluster. I can deploy another one and have that same set of templated resources.
And VMware is providing the storage plane. So it says, okay, I'm bringing this container in. Where are you storing it?
The back end for you to be able to deploy that Kubernetes
and the networks that it sits on
and over and over again. Yeah.
Okay. And when you deploy, I'm guessing it makes it easy to deploy a Kubernetes cluster.
Yeah.
In that, is it spin up just bare VMs and install the K8 stuff on it, or is it closer to the metal?
So it's still going to be ESXi under the covers. We're still going to run Kubernetes inside of a machine itself. So you're still going to build that Kubernetes.
There's still a
cluster.
VM in terms of yep. Well, I would assume that, right? And that I'm guessing is a VMware flavor of a very bare
Photon
bones.
OS. Yeah.
Photon OS. Sure.
Yeah. You can template it. You can bring Photon. You can bring Ubuntu in the package management, and then. As you define the cluster, you can pre-stage those resources to be consumed. The one other thing about that is very, very consistently, everyone, it isn't really talked about because it just has been assumed and moved forward, but the concept of the region and then the availability zones in the region, that also exists inside of your vSphere environment. So when you're
we're talking multiple data centers that I'm running vSphere on, and I can or the cloud.
Or the cloud. I mean, it doesn't have to be multiple data centers, right? You could say these 3 hosts are a zone, and these kind 3 of hosts like are a zone.
How we used to treat like a rack in a data center that could be a failure domain, right? Depending on the power going to it or whatever.
And really, that's what it is. You think about those availability zones.
AZ, yeah.
You think about those availability zones in the failure domain, and that's kind of the same concept, right? So this rack and this rack can be redundant to each other.
Well, so our own Ryan Grell, he just had a webinar with Chris Crow from Pure talking about Portworx, which is Pure's storage story for containers, right? And if you've got questions too, reach out to Matt, myself, or Ryan on containerization too. It's containers been around. Well, containers talk about LXC and all of this. Containers have been around forever, right? But in terms of Kubernetes and that's Google's contribution and how that goes, I think VMware is like the number 2 contributor to. They were saying they're to the open source project, so they're very heavily invested. But it's something that I wouldn't say every one of our customers is asking us about it. It's a curiosity, and I also think it's a specific use case, right? And is everything going to come over to containers? No, but
I'd love it to.
Well, that's the thing. As big fans of the open source community, Coz, I know you're a huge consumer of them within your own home lab. I'm more of a traditionalist, and that doesn't mean I don't see the value. It's just I don't know if I'm ready to eat my own dog food on that. I do run a handful of containers in my environment at home. I think one of them is it's funny. I am now running Unify's Protect camera system in a container, running in a VM that's running on an ESXi server ARM version, the Fling, on a Pi 4. And I bought the Pi 4 before the Pipocalypse, where you can't get one for less than $300 now or whatever. But remember the $15 computer? But anyway, that is running in a container, and it's running better than it was when I was running it before cobbling it all together. So that's pretty cool. So I still don't see the need to run Plex in a container, things like that. I just it's the Ian Malcolm, just because you should you? kind of thing, but definitely seeing a little bit more traction there. So if you've got questions, we've got folks on
We've
staff
got answers
to talk about it. Hopefully, right? all we can do is say, I don't know.
right?
All right. So we talked about the DPU with Tanzu. Tell me about the TPM. So I talk with my customers and they want to do server refreshes and I'm building them and I see the TPM. And quite honestly, the cost is so minimal that why wouldn't you include a chip? Would you build a server and not sell it with a TPM chip in it today?
Negative. The two biggest changes as far as my server design right now in the last 12 months has been every new server I design and sell right now has a boot card, a boot RAID card, and 2 M2 drives to install the OS on, so ESX. And second is they've got a TPM 2.0 module in it.
Yep.
That's
let me back,
Mm-hmm.
moonwalk here a minute. Or what was it? It was in the 7.0 life cycle that VMware came out and said, VMware came out and said, and I think this was
did it and didn't say it.
Yeah. So update 2 had a problem. I think it was update 2 where it was blowing these cards up.
Left, right, and center. Yep.
And when I say these cards, I mean the SD card and or the USB onboard card to install ESXi. Forever, ESXi, it boots into RAM and then you're done. The SD card dies. Oops, any config changes aren't going to save. You'll have to reinstall in the next reboot, but we're still good. It'll still run, won't crash.
Who cares?
Whatever.
It's ESXi host, whatever.
And as time has gone on, more and more they wanted to write down scratch. They wanted to dump logs. They wanted to do all this stuff on this storage that's not designed to be persistent or resilient. So that the update 2 happened, they came out and they basically said, hey, that's it. This setup is no longer supported. And it will be straight up deprecated and not even allowed to happen in a future release. And the sky fell and this and that bug with the update 2, it accelerated that. Anyway, update 3 fixed that bug. And VMware relented and said, okay. It's still supported for the time being. Now, writing's on the wall, right? Big flashing advertising banner coming down the road. That the status quo remains with vSphere 8, but ultimately, when it comes, like Coz said, a new server build, it is a RAID 1 between 2 drives or that boot card that's got the 2 M2s, right? Which is a bit of a drag, right? When I think about the cost of that versus the cost of a USB drive. And ultimately with fast shared storage, I really wish I could just boot the hypervisor into RAM. And then if I need to write or scratch or whatever, send it down the wire. Like,
I mean, if you want to go really far on that end, you can just do network boot, a network EFI boot, and then just have a stateless system that gets sucked in and provisioned each time it restarts.
And I completely agree. And on one side of my mouth, I'm saying that with what I just postulated with send it down the wire. And the other hand, I'm like, that makes me incredibly nervous. And I don't
just a little bit more complicated, right?
Well, that's like boot from SAN. I don't love it. There's just something about it.
No, not boot from SAN. Not like, hey, let me instantiate my iSCSI and then mount this LUN and then that's where I boot my OS from.
Yeah. No, I know. It's just, I ran into that with a NUC that I had where the NUC itself didn't support PXE booting.
That's the word.
No, didn't support boot from SAN. SAN being iSCSI in this case. And so what I did was I leveraged the supported PXE on the network card to boot this thing called iPXE, which did provide that kind of function. It's really weird, but ultimately it's just, this is an emotional comment. It just strikes me as uncomfortable ultimately. But in terms of, well, if your storage dies, who cares? You're booting what? What are you booting it for? You can look at it that way.
Well, there's
something
a level
about local ability gives me that warm fuzzy.
There's a level of scale there, and it's a thing that a lot of our customers and you and I don't do, but that's absolutely what Amazon and Azure and whomever cloud provider is doing. They've got racks and racks of physical hardware, and you say, I need you sign up for VMC on AWS, and they're like, all right, cool. These 4 servers. Here's your boot information.
They're not sending out data center dude to install it on that metal. No.
Nope. And it boots and it sucks their OS off of the network and configures and provisions and stands up and joins the cluster. And
I have that in my shop when I do deployments against some mass configurations that I have a few customers doing where it's like, listen, I'm not going to just bare metal this whole thing. So I plug it all into the network and I hit go, and I leverage Ansible to do some of that for ESXi. I certainly do it for some NetApp Ansible where I deploy all of that. There is, unfortunately,
they're really good. They've got like that Ansible button or the API button up in the corner of the NetApp UI.
The only thing about the NetApp though, I still need to say, here, Mr. Node, here, Mr. Node, you have a presence. A straight up DHCP would be fantastic. On the ESXi side, I have to get into the BIOS and trigger who is going, what card it's going to boot off, and I have to grab the MAC address. And then I tell my Pixie server, the Kickstart, hey, here you go. Here's who you're going to be talking to, which ideally, at some point you have to point, this is going to be that. You can't just...
I mean, you could get super fancy and get like a little barcode scanner. Most of those servers nowadays have that MAC address as a barcode on the back.
Oof. All right. All right. All right. Let's talk about one more thing here. Well, okay. So TPM, I jumped the gun on that a little bit. Now, I understood early on, like 7.0, that VMware could do the virtual TPM without the chip behind it, right?
Yes.
So what changed?
So what changed was, holy crap, now I have to learn everything about TPM in the last 6 months. TPM is a trusted platform module. That's what TPM stands for. TPM is a repository for the certificates for the software that's installed on the OS. So what that means is it's a separate, discrete chip on the motherboard where you sign the installed software and write those keys to that TPM module itself. TPM 2.0 is, I think Microsoft is the one that's pushed this more with Windows 11, I believe, in that you need TPM to run Windows 11, et cetera, and it's going to fail hard if you don't have that. With vSphere 8, we get that same kind of message that we're getting with 7 and the previous CPU versions. It'll pop up a little warning at boot and say, this TPM module is a TPM 1.2 module. We're supposed to boot with, you're supposed to have a 2 for this software version. We'll continue installing, we'll continue working, everything will be fine, but you might experience some weird stuff. So subjectively, as I've moved my lab to 8, I've been able to install the OS. I've been able to get the cluster up and running, and I just can't remediate my cluster with the update manager because, hey, this thing is installed and it's a different version than what I'm expecting to see because the signatures don't match because we'd added some security components to vSphere 8.
Is this you're going to see that at the hypervisor, or do you see that really in the end user guest OS, Windows 11?
So I experienced that way more than I expected in the hypervisor itself, to the point where I went and dropped the $200 on Amazon to buy the TPM 2.0
That's
chips
the thing. For
my hardware. And I went out there and all I did was swap them out, swap them in. You remove it from the cluster, re-add it to the cluster, and then suddenly remediate the hypervisors just works. And update the OS just works, and install these VIBs just works.
Well, that's one of the last things I wanted to talk about was the lifecycle manager is changing, but for the better. And that, I mean, what was it? Was it vCenter Upgrade Manager or vSphere Update Manager? VUM, right? Whatever it was.
Yeah, VMware Update. I mean, it was vSphere Update Manager.
I always felt every time I demonstrated, explained it, showed it to a customer, even to myself, I'm like, this is the whole baseline concept and applying it. I get the concepts all made sense. I just felt it was very clunky and awkwardly implemented in the GUI. And it's something that I think because of that, customers were far less comfortable with staying up to date on patching, which my goodness, now your ESXi servers on the WAN can't help you, man. I mean, I'll shake my head first, then we can talk about it, but really
don't do that. Yeah.
But at the same time, you're talking now that ransomware, if it gets on the network, unless the customer is isolating their out of band stuff for ESXi, which you hope you are, but the reality is a lot of times an end user's computer might be able to reach the management interface on ESXi. At that point, we've seen a lot of vulnerabilities, some serious ones where all you need is access to that IP and you can attack and encrypt that all the workloads on those hosts. That's bad juju. Any improvement in that lifecycle manager, the patching is welcome, right? Because we've got so many customers that I mean, major versions are one thing, right? Because you still have to do the vCenter thing and all first and all of that. So it's a lot more of a just apply my critical patches to put me in maintenance mode. It's not
Right.
that simple for major, but inside the major versions, these vulnerabilities, that has to be accessible. And I'm happy to see that improving.
So there's two things. I want to go finish one thing about the TPM first. TPM, as far as the hardware and the ESXi OS, it cares about that. That is completely separate from the vTPM. The virtual TPM is what we present to the guest OS. And that gives us a shared cluster, a shared resource for all of those, all of that data to be held onto for the guest OS, for that TPM data. Those are two separate things. You can run a vTPM and run Windows 11 without the TPM 2.0 chip inside of the hypervisor.
Okay.
Those are separate. You will need that for Windows 11. That's going to happen for the guest OS eventually, probably servers here in a minute also. Update manager. What you're talking about with the update manager was the upload the ISO to the data store, not the data store, upload the ISO to the vCenter server, install that baseline, attach these security updates to this profile, attach that profile to the cluster, and then go try to remediate all of those. There was a lot of individual components there. That has been replaced, and there's a lot more simplicity in the management of updates for the hypervisor itself. And now we've got this context of an image. So you choose the image, the vSphere vSphere 7 update 3 LMNOP.
Sure.
Right? You choose that image, and then you choose the Cisco add-ons. You choose the Dell add-ons.
See, that's a big thing.
You choose
that's big.
Right? So we're kind of separating that
the
vendor
base from the specialty stuff.
The vendor OS ISO thing,
Yes.
we kind of separate those out. And then you can, so you add the vendor stuff, and then you can add, if you've got, I've got a Broadcom network adapter, I've got this network adapter, and I need these other drivers installed, you can add that. The update manager will also interact with, if you've got a hardware management service. So I'm not sure that UCS specifically is one that'll connect, but if you've got a hardware management piece, you can connect that to vCenter, and vCenter will interact with that to make sure that the hardware gets packages updated on it as well. So you build that together as an image. There's less buttons, but that piece is then applied to the cluster itself. The software that gets installed is different than the configuration.
Yes, which is important.
Mm-hmm. So your host profiles still exist. Your host profiles is what says this hypervisor should have 4 VM kernel interfaces.
Yeah.
These are the addresses that should be on those VM kernel interfaces. So you still have that host profile concept. You still have the configuration piece, but now we have this ability for the hypervisors to all be on the same OS. They're all running the same code. And that's kind of the point with a new update process.
And that's kind of like what we like to talk about with that Terraform, that declarative configuration management, where this is the state I want it to be in. Don't do it again. Just make sure it's there and tell me what I need to do. I like that. And I think I think it will help people stay a little bit closer to comfort when it comes. What I don't like is now a customer's on 6.5. Now we're already at 8. Well, what's that? The longer that gap, the wider that gap becomes, the riskier the upgrade there. Or now you need a multi-step. I'm not saying that's the case, but those things are more likely the longer you get out from up to date. And I think if you have a more approachable update management paradigm, you're closer to up to date. At any point that you need to make that jump, it's not so uncomfortable at that point. That's good.
You should be running 7 right now. You should be super comfortable with 7 today.
Are we comfortable now? Up 8 has seen update 1, right?
8 has
or G8.
8 is GAs. 8 is general availability.
GA. Yeah. But has it seen the update 1?
I don't think we've got an update.
That's usually my rule of thumb. That's usually just,
So that's the point, is you should be on 7 today, right now.
Yes. So if someone said, hey, Matt, I'm on 6.7, do I go to 7, update 3, ABCDD, or am I going to 8?
I would still take you to 7 today.
There you go. Yeah. And depending on the IVOXY consultant you talk to, you might get a different answer. And we're okay with that, because everything is considered, right? And it doesn't mean that we have completely the right answer because I'm Matt or he's Matt or whatever.
Who are you, Mr. Customer, Mrs. Customer?
Right.
What kind of
stance,
stress? Yeah. What kind of stuff are you acceptable with?
And 8 does any of the things we just talked about turn you on? Does it say, oh yeah, or are you more about stability and staying N-1? They're great. Like you said, like the way we do things, whether it's products or services, we don't have a solution until we ask questions and see what the needs are. So I like that. Thanks for putting a nice bow on that.
Exactly.
Well, Matt, we got to go. We got to give you guys all your days back. We're going to keep the train going here, keep the momentum going on these. Do not forget, March 21st to 24th, Matt's Intro to vSphere 8 class, limited availability. Went in that, reach out to your account managers post haste. And then a little bit farther down the road, but I'll be here before you know it, as you know, April 18th to the 21st, vSphere 8 Advanced, both taught by your very own Mr. Matt Cozzolino. And really looking forward to how that comes out, Matt. I'm excited for you. And thanks for putting all the work in on that.
My pleasure.
All right. Glad you made it through without coughing up a lung. Sound great.
It's right there. I'm working on it.
No, you're doing a great job. Thanks everybody for listening to yet another episode of Data Center Therapy. We'll see you next time, y'all.